Some people think power is loud, but real power doesn't need to raise its voice. The rain fell in thin, steady lines across the empty street, turning the pavement into a mirror of flickering streetlights and distant headlights. Naomi Carter walked alone, her heels tapping softly against the concrete, each step measured, calm, controlled, like someone who had long learned how to move through a world that often watched before it listened. A black sedan idled half a block away, its engine low, almost blending into the quiet hum of the city at night. But Naomi didn't look at it. Not yet, because she didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air, that subtle tightening, the kind that comes right before something goes wrong. "Hey you." A voice cut through the silence, sharp, authoritative, followed by the slow roll of tires as a patrol car pulled alongside her, red and blue lights flashing just enough to stain the wet pavement with color. Officer Ryan Cole stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with a deliberate weight, his eyes already locked onto her before a single word was exchanged, as if he had already decided who she was. "What are you doing out here this late?" he asked, his tone not curious, not concerned, but edged with something colder, something heavier. Naomi stopped, turning slowly, her expression neutral, her posture relaxed, hands visible, her voice steady when she answered, "Walking home." It was simple, truthful, and yet the silence that followed stretched longer than it should have, thick with judgment. Ryan let out a quiet scoff, glancing her up and down like he was searching for something that didn't fit, or maybe something that did, something he had already decided to find. "Mind showing me some ID?" he said, though it didn't sound like a question. Naomi reached into her coat with calm precision, her fingers brushing against something hidden beneath the fabric before pulling out her wallet, but she paused just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to feel intentional. Imagine standing there, being asked to prove you belong, not because of what you've done, but because of how you look. The rain picked up, tapping softly against the hood of the cruiser, the sound filling the space between them as Naomi handed over her ID. Ryan barely glanced at it before his expression hardened. Like the answer didn't matter, like the decision had already been made. "Step over here," he said, gesturing toward the car, his voice firmer now, more commanding, and when Naomi didn't immediately move, he took a step closer, closing the distance just enough to make the air feel tighter. She looked at him then, really looked at him, her eyes steady, unreadable, almost searching. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked quietly, not as a challenge, not as a threat, but as a fact waiting to be understood. Ryan smirked, shaking his head slightly. "You people always think there's something special going on," he muttered, reaching for her wrist, guiding her toward the cruiser with a confidence that came from years of never being questioned. The metal clicked softly as restraints were secured, the sound sharp against the quiet night. And still, Naomi didn't resist. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just stood there, breathing steady, eyes forward, like she was waiting. Because somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the rain, another engine had just started to approach. The rain did not stop, it only grew steadier, like the night itself was holding its breath as Naomi stood beside the cruiser, the cold metal pressing faintly against her wrists, not painful, just present, a reminder of how quickly assumptions could turn into decisions. Officer Ryan Cole moved around the front of the vehicle, his radio crackling softly at his shoulder, but he ignored it, his attention fixed on her like he had something to prove, not to her, but to himself. "You get used to this?" he asked, leaning slightly against the door, his tone casual, almost conversational, but there was something underneath it, something sharp. Naomi did not answer right away. She watched the reflection of the flashing lights ripple across the wet pavement, red, blue, steady and predictable, unlike people. "Used to what?" she replied finally, her voice calm, measured, like every word had already been chosen before it was spoken. Ryan gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "Walking around like you own the place," he said. "Like nothing applies to you." The words hung there, heavier than they should have been. Naomi turned her head slightly, her gaze settling on him, not defensive, not angry, just steady. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "I just know where I belong." For a moment, something flickered across his face, not doubt, not yet, but a brief hesitation, the kind that disappears as quickly as it comes. He pushed it away, straightening up, his voice tightening. Yeah, we will see about that. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, a voice trying to break through the static, but he reached up and turned the volume down without even listening. Control. That was what mattered. Control of the situation. Control of the narrative. The street around them remained mostly empty, a few distant headlights passing through intersections blocks away, never slowing, never stopping. It felt isolated, like a small pocket of the city had been cut off from everything else. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, not resisting, not struggling, just adjusting, her breathing slow and even, like she was not standing in the middle of a confrontation, but waiting for a meeting to begin. Imagine standing there, knowing exactly how this moment ends, but letting it play out anyway. You are awfully calm, Ryan said, narrowing his eyes, studying her more carefully now, like something about her did not fit the story he had already built. Most people would be a lot more nervous right now. Naomi's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, more like recognition. Most people are not paying attention, she said. He frowned. Paying attention to what? She did not answer directly. Instead, her eyes moved past him, just for a second, toward the far end of the street. It was subtle, almost nothing, but Ryan noticed. He turned his head instinctively, scanning the darkness, but all he saw at first was rain and empty road. When he looked back at her, something had changed, not in her position, not in her expression, but in the space between them, like the air itself had shifted. Then, faint at first, a low hum began to grow, steady, controlled, not like a passing car, but something more deliberate. Headlights appeared at the far end of the street, not one set, but several, moving in quiet formation, their beams cutting clean lines through the rain. Ryan straightened, his posture tightening, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio, this time turning the volume up. The static cleared just enough for a voice to come through, sharp, urgent, repeating a code he did not fully recognize. Naomi finally looked back at him, her eyes calm, certain, no hesitation left. Now you should start paying attention, she said softly. As the vehicles drew closer, the night no longer quiet, no longer under his control. The headlights did not rush in. They approached with precision, slow and controlled, like they already knew exactly where they were going and why. Their beams slicing through the rain in clean, unwavering lines that made the entire street feel smaller, tighter, like the space itself was closing in around Officer Ryan Cole. His fingers hovered near his radio, not quite pressing the button, not quite pulling away, caught in that thin space between confidence and uncertainty. Stay right there, he said, but the command no longer carried the same weight, the same certainty it had just moments ago. Naomi Carter did not move. She did not need to. The sound of engines grew louder, deeper, until the first black SUV rolled to a stop just yards away, its headlights dimming slightly, not aggressive, not chaotic, just deliberate. Then the doors opened. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. Figures stepped out, dressed in dark suits that blended into the night, their movements calm, coordinated, each step measured in a way that made it clear they were not reacting, they were executing. Ryan straightened, instinctively adjusting his stance, his voice returning, sharper now, defensive. This is an active stop, he called out. Identify yourselves. The rain tapped steadily against the hood of his cruiser, the only sound that answered him for a brief second that felt longer than it should have. Then one of the figures stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch the edge of a badge, not flashed, not forced, simply revealed. Stand down, Officer Cole, the man said, his voice even, controlled, the kind of tone that did not ask to be obeyed. It expected it. Ryan blinked, the name landing harder than the words. He had not given it. Not out loud. His grip tightened slightly near the radio, his mind moving faster now, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of a situation that was slipping out of the shape he understood. What is this? He asked, his voice lower now, less certain. The man's gaze shifted past him, not dismissive, just focused, landing on Naomi. Director Carter, he said with a slight nod, respectful, precise. Apologies for the delay. The word hung in the air, quiet, but it changed everything. Ryan turned slowly, his eyes landing on Naomi as if seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her, Not the version he had constructed, not the assumption he had acted on, but the reality standing in front of him, calm, composed, unchanged. The cuffs suddenly felt louder than before, their presence undeniable, the symbol of a mistake that had already been made. Naomi met his gaze, her expression not angry, not triumphant, just steady, grounded in something deeper than the moment. "You should listen more carefully," she said softly, her voice carrying through the rain without effort. Behind them, another agent stepped forward, speaking into a device, relaying information in low, precise tones, while a second approached Ryan, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with a quiet expectation that needed no explanation. The balance had shifted. Not suddenly, not violently, but completely. Ryan's shoulders tensed, his breath catching slightly as the weight of the moment settled in, not all at once, but piece by piece, like a structure slowly realizing it could no longer hold itself up. The street, the rain, the flashing lights, everything was still there, but it no longer belonged to him. And for the first time that night, he was the one standing in a situation he did not control, facing someone he had already underestimated, someone who had never needed to prove anything at all. For a moment, no one moved, not because they could not, but because the moment itself demanded stillness, the kind of silence that follows when reality begins to shift and no one is quite ready to accept it yet. Officer Ryan Cole's eyes flickered between the agents and Naomi Carter, his mind racing to rebuild control, to find something solid to stand on, but every piece he reached for seemed to slip just out of place. "Director," he repeated under his breath, the word unfamiliar in his mouth, like it did not belong in the version of events he had already decided was true. Naomi remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, as if the rain, the lights, the sudden presence of authority around them had always been part of the plan. One of the agents stepped closer, his tone calm, almost quiet, but unmistakably firm. "We will take it from here." It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a conclusion. Ryan swallowed, his hand slowly dropping away from his radio, the small motion carrying more weight than anything he had said all night. "She was being detained," he said, his voice tightening slightly, searching for ground, for justification, for something that still made sense. Routine stop. The agent did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at him, the kind of look that did not challenge, but clarified. "Then you will document it," he replied evenly. "Every detail." The rain tapped harder now, bouncing off the hood of the cruiser, sliding down the windows, turning reflections into blurred streaks of red and blue that no longer felt like signals of control, but reminders of something slipping away. Naomi turned her head slightly toward Ryan, her eyes meeting his again, not cold, not warm, just clear. "You asked me what I was doing out here," she said softly. "I told you the truth." There was no accusation in her voice, no need for it. The weight of what had happened was already present, already understood. Another agent moved behind her, his movements careful, precise, unlocking the restraints without urgency, without spectacle, just a quiet correction of something that should not have happened. The faint metallic sound seemed louder than before, not because it was, but because everything else had gone still. Naomi flexed her hands slightly, not dramatically, just enough to restore feeling, her composure never breaking, never shifting. Ryan watched, his jaw tightening, his thoughts catching up too late, each realization landing heavier than the last. The questions he had not asked, the assumptions he had not checked. The moment he had crossed from authority into something else entirely without even noticing. "I did not know," he said finally, the words coming out quieter than he expected, less like a defense and more like an admission. Naomi held his gaze for a second longer, not dismissing him, not engaging further, just acknowledging the statement for what it was. "That is the problem," she replied. Around them, the agents moved with quiet efficiency, one speaking into a device, another scanning the area, their presence steady, controlled, the situation already resolved in their eyes. The street was no longer tense. It was settled, decided, and Ryan stood in the middle of it, no longer directing, no longer certain, the night no longer his to define, realizing too late that control had never really belonged to him in the first place. The rain softened into a steady whisper, no longer sharp against the pavement but constant, like the night was settling after something had already been decided. Naomi Carter adjusted her coat slightly, the fabric falling back into place as if nothing had ever disturbed it, her composure untouched, her presence unchanged, while around her the agents moved with quiet coordination, their voices low, their actions precise, every detail handled without urgency, because there was no longer any doubt about what needed to happen. Officer Ryan Cole remained still beside his cruiser, the flashing lights now reflecting across his face in uneven patterns, red then blue then red again, each pulse revealing something different, uncertainty, tension, realization, all layered beneath the surface he had relied on for years. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped, the words never forming fully, because for the first time that night, he did not know which version of the story he could still stand behind. One of the agents approached him, not aggressively, not confrontational, but with a calm presence that carried more authority than raised voices ever could. "We are going to need your statement," the agent said, his tone even, professional, leaving no space for negotiation, only procedure. Ryan nodded slowly, the motion small, almost automatic, as if his body understood before his mind caught up. "Yeah," he replied quietly, his voice lacking the sharp edge it carried earlier, replaced now with something more measured, more careful. "Of course." Naomi turned slightly, her gaze moving across the scene one last time, not searching, not questioning, simply observing, as though she was confirming that everything had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Imagine standing in a moment where nothing changes on the surface, yet everything underneath has shifted completely. The same street, the same rain, the same people, but a different truth. She stepped forward, not away, not toward anyone in particular, but with a quiet purpose, her presence drawing a subtle pause from those around her without her needing to ask for it. Ryan watched her, his eyes following the movement, something unspoken settling in his expression, not regret alone, but recognition, the slow realization that the moment he thought he controlled had never belonged to him at all. "Director Carter," one of the agents said softly, falling into step beside her, his tone respectful, waiting for instruction rather than giving it. Naomi glanced at him briefly, then back toward the street ahead, her voice calm, grounded. "We continue as planned," she said, as if this interruption had been nothing more than a delay already accounted for. Behind her, another agent spoke quietly into a device, relaying updates, while a third began documenting the scene, every detail noted, every action recorded, not with emotion, but with precision. Ryan shifted his weight, his hands now empty at his sides, the absence of control more noticeable than its presence had ever been. "It was not supposed to go like this," he said under his breath, not directed at anyone, just a thought spoken out loud. Naomi paused, just for a second, turning her head slightly, enough for her voice to reach him without effort. "It never does," she replied, her tone neither harsh nor forgiving, simply true. The rain continued to fall, steady and unchanging, as Naomi moved toward the waiting vehicle, the door opening before she reached it, not because she demanded it, but because it was understood. She stepped inside without looking back, the interior light briefly illuminating her face before the door closed softly behind her, sealing the moment. Outside, Ryan remained where he was, the flashing lights still painting the night, but no longer defining it, as the quiet weight of consequence settled in, not loud, not sudden, but certain. The SUV door closed with a soft, controlled sound, sealing Naomi Carter inside a space that immediately felt separate from the street, from the rain, from everything that had just unfolded, while outside the world continued moving as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. The engine of the vehicle remained running, a low, steady hum that blended with the sound of rainfall, creating a quiet rhythm that contrasted sharply with the tension still lingering in Officer Ryan Cole's chest. He stood beside his cruiser, unmoving, watching as one agent approached the driver's side of the SUV, exchanging a brief nod before stepping back, the kind of silent communication that did not need explanation. Inside the vehicle, Naomi sat upright, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her eyes focused forward, not on the agents, not on the street behind her, but on something beyond the moment, something already in motion long before this encounter ever began. Imagine knowing that what just happened was only a small piece of something much larger, something no one else on that street could fully see. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights from Ryan's cruiser continued to pulse against the wet pavement. But they no longer commanded attention. They no longer defined authority. They simply existed, fading into the background as the presence of something greater took its place. One of the agents returned to Ryan, holding a small device, his expression neutral, professional. "Dispatch has been notified," he said evenly. "Internal review will follow." The words were simple, procedural, but they carried a weight that settled heavily in the air, not dramatic, not loud, just inevitable. Ryan nodded again, slower this time, his gaze drifting briefly toward the SUV, then away, as if looking too long might force him to confront something he was not ready to fully process. "I understand," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction, the phrase sounding more like an acknowledgement than true comprehension. The agent studied him for a moment, not with judgment, but with clarity, as if measuring what remained unspoken. "Understanding comes later," he said quietly. "Right now, it is about what you did." The statement lingered, not as an accusation, but as a fact, one that did not require argument or defense. The rain continued its steady fall, each drop merging into the next, washing over the scene without changing it, without erasing what had already taken place. In the distance, the faint sound of another siren approached, not urgent, not chaotic, just part of the process now unfolding. Inside the SUV, Naomi exhaled slowly, her expression unchanged, but her eyes shifting slightly as if reviewing the sequence of events, not emotionally, but analytically, each detail placed exactly where it belonged. She reached into her coat, retrieving a small device, its screen lighting up softly, displaying information that moved quickly, efficiently, updates that connected this moment to others far beyond this quiet street. "Proceed," she said calmly, her voice low but clear, directed not to anyone outside, but into the device itself, a signal sent, a continuation triggered. Outside, Ryan remained where he was, the weight of the night settling deeper, not through force, but through realization, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but builds, piece by piece, until it cannot be ignored. The street, once empty and silent, now felt observed, documented, understood in ways it had not been before. And as the first additional patrol car turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the rain, it became clear that what had begun as a single moment of control had transformed into something far larger, something that would not end when the rain stopped, or when the lights faded, but would continue, quietly, steadily, long after this night was over. The new patrol car did not arrive with urgency. It rolled in at a controlled pace, headlights cutting through the rain before slowing to a stop behind Ryan's cruiser, its presence adding weight to a scene that was already shifting beyond his control. Two officers stepped out, their movements cautious, eyes scanning the situation not with authority, but with awareness, as if they already understood that this was no longer a routine call. Ryan did not turn immediately, but he felt them, the subtle change in energy, the quiet realization that he was no longer the one setting the tone. Inside the SUV, Naomi Carter remained still, the faint glow of the device in her hand reflecting softly against her face as information continued to update, lines of data connecting this moment to a larger pattern, one that had been unfolding long before this street, long before this night. Imagine seeing a single moment not as an isolated mistake, but as part of something deeper, something repeated, something that needed to be seen clearly before it could be changed. Outside, one of the newly arrived officers approached slowly, stopping just short of Ryan, his voice measured. "What is going on here?" he asked, not accusing, not assuming, simply asking. But even that question carried a different tone now, one that did not automatically place Ryan in control. Ryan exhaled, the sound almost lost in the rain, his answer delayed not because he did not have one, but because none of them felt complete anymore. "It is being handled," he said finally, the words sounding distant, as if he was repeating something he had heard rather than something he believed. The officer's gaze shifted past him toward the SUV, toward the agents who moved with quiet certainty, and something in his expression changed, recognition, maybe even caution. Handled by who? He asked quietly. Before Ryan could respond, one of the agents stepped forward, his presence enough to redirect the conversation without raising his voice. Federal authority, he said simply. The words settled quickly, efficiently, leaving no space for confusion. The second officer nodded once, stepping back slightly, his posture adjusting, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The lines had been redrawn. Ryan stood there, caught between what he had believed at the start of the night and what was now undeniable, the gap between those two realities growing wider with every passing second. The rain continued to fall, washing over the scene, but it did not erase anything. It only made the reflections clearer, sharper, harder to ignore. Inside the SUV, Naomi lowered the device slightly, her eyes lifting, not to the agents, not to the officers, but toward the windshield, toward the world outside that continued to move, unaware of the quiet shift that had just taken place. Her voice came again, calm, precise, directed into the device. Flag the incident, she said. Full review. There was no emotion in the words, only purpose. Outside, Ryan's shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, the kind that comes when there is no longer anything left to hold on to except the truth of what has already happened. One of the agents approached him once more, his tone unchanged. You will be contacted, he said. Until then, do not alter your report. Ryan nodded, slower this time, the motion heavier, more deliberate, as if each movement now carried consequence. The flashing lights from his cruiser continued to pulse behind him, but they no longer felt like a signal of authority. They felt like a reminder, constant, unavoidable, reflecting back a moment he could not undo. And as the rain fell steadily around them, the night moved forward, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that what had begun here was far from over. The rain carried on, steady and relentless, as if the night itself refused to pause, even when everything within it had already changed. The second patrol car idled quietly now, its headlights dimmed, its presence no longer an interruption but a witness, another set of eyes absorbing what had unfolded without fully understanding it. Officer Ryan Cole remained beside his cruiser, the distance between him and the black SUV, feeling far greater than the few yards of wet pavement that separated them. It was not space. It was awareness, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but settles slowly, pressing heavier with every passing second. Inside the SUV, Naomi Carter sat still, her gaze forward, her expression composed, but her mind already several steps ahead, tracing connections, reviewing signals, aligning this moment with a pattern that extended far beyond a single officer, a single street, a single night. Imagine realizing that what feels like an isolated incident is actually part of something that has been repeating quietly, unnoticed, until someone finally sees it clearly enough to act. The device in her hand vibrated once, a subtle confirmation, and she glanced down briefly, scanning the update with practiced ease before responding in the same calm tone she had maintained from the beginning. Cross-reference prior stops, she said. Flag inconsistencies. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only direction. Outside, one of the agents stepped aside, speaking into a secure line, his voice low but precise, relaying information that moved faster than anything visible on the street. Another agent remained near the SUV, his posture relaxed but alert, his attention not fixed on any single person, but on the entire scene, as if nothing here existed in isolation. Ryan shifted slightly, his hand brushing against the side of his uniform, a small, unconscious motion that revealed more than any words could. He glanced toward the other officers, toward the agents, toward the SUV, searching for something familiar, something that still fit the structure he understood, but everything felt different now. Not chaotic, not out of control, just redefined. One of the newly arrived officers approached him again, slower this time, his tone quieter. You did not know? He asked, not accusing, not defending, simply asking what now felt like the only question that mattered. Ryan exhaled, the sound heavy, his answer delayed just long enough to show that it was no longer automatic. No, he said finally. I did not. The officer nodded slightly, his gaze drifting toward the SUV, toward Naomi, then back to Ryan. That is not what this is about, he replied softly. The words landed differently than expected, not dismissing the mistake, but reframing it entirely. Ryan frowned slightly, the meaning not immediately clear, but something about it lingered, something that suggested this moment was not about what he had known, but about what he had assumed. Inside the SUV, Naomi's eyes lifted again, her focus shifting outward, not to observe, but to confirm. The pieces were aligning. The responses were consistent. The pattern was clearer now. She leaned back slightly, her voice calm as she spoke once more into the device. "Prepare internal brief," she said. "We move forward at first light." Outside, the rain softened again, the steady rhythm easing just enough to make the silence between sounds more noticeable, more defined. Ryan looked down briefly at the wet pavement, at the reflection of his own cruiser lights, distorted by water, shifting with every drop that fell. For a moment, he saw himself the way the night now held him, not as the one in control, but as part of something being observed, recorded, understood in a way he had not expected. And as he lifted his gaze again, the scene before him no longer felt like a moment he could step away from, but the beginning of something that would follow him long after the rain had stopped, long after the lights had faded, long after this quiet street returned to what it had been before. The rain had settled into a fine mist now, barely visible under the streetlights, yet still present enough to blur the edges of everything it touched, as if the night itself was softening what had just happened without ever truly erasing it. Officer Ryan Cole stood motionless, his gaze fixed somewhere ahead but not focused, like he was looking through the scene rather than at it, trying to place himself back into a version of reality that no longer fit. The flashing lights from his cruiser continued their steady rhythm, but they felt distant now, almost detached, like echoes of a role he had already stepped out of without realizing it. Across from him, the agents maintained their quiet positions, no longer adjusting, no longer reacting, simply holding the space with a calm certainty that made everything else feel unnecessary. Inside the SUV, Naomi Carter remained composed, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, but her attention had shifted again, deeper now, beyond the immediate moment, beyond the street, beyond the people gathered around her. The device in her hand displayed a series of updates, lines of information connecting names, times, locations, each detail forming a pattern that was no longer abstract, no longer distant, but confirmed. Imagine watching a puzzle come together piece by piece, only to realize that the picture it forms is not new, just finally visible. Naomi's eyes moved across the screen, absorbing each update without hesitation, her expression calm, but her focus sharp, precise, unyielding. "Confirmed," she said quietly, her voice steady as it carried into the device. "Pattern established." Outside, one of the agents paused mid-step, receiving the transmission, his head tilting slightly as he listened, then nodding once before relaying it further, the information moving quickly through channels that did not need to be seen to be understood. Ryan shifted again, his breath slow, deliberate, as if grounding himself in something physical while everything else continued to shift around him. He glanced at the other officers, then at the agents, then finally toward the SUV, his gaze lingering there longer this time, not out of confusion, but out of recognition. Something had changed, not just in the situation, but in how he saw it, how he saw himself within it. One of the agents approached him once more, stopping just within speaking distance, his tone unchanged, still calm, still measured. "This will not end here," he said. It was not a warning. It was not a threat. It was simply the next step. Ryan nodded slowly, the motion heavier now, more deliberate, as if each acknowledgement carried weight he could feel settling into place. "I understand," he replied, but this time the words were different, not automatic, not defensive, but real, shaped by the moment rather than spoken out of habit. The agent studied him for a brief second, then gave a small nod in return before stepping back, his role in the exchange complete. Inside the SUV, Naomi lowered the device slightly, her gaze lifting once more, not to observe, but to confirm what she already knew. The moment had passed, but its impact had not. It had already begun to extend outward, beyond this street, beyond this night, into systems, into records, into decisions that would be made long after the rain stopped falling. She exhaled slowly, her voice calm as she spoke again, final, precise. Initiate review protocol, she said. Full scope. Outside. The mist continued to fall, light but persistent, settling over the street, over the vehicles, over the people who remained, each one now part of something larger than they had been just minutes before. Ryan looked down one last time at the pavement, at the reflection of the lights, distorted and shifting, then lifted his gaze again, no longer searching for control, but beginning to understand what it meant to be seen clearly for the first time. And as the quiet hum of engines and distant sirens blended into the night, it became clear that this was no longer just a moment that had happened. It was something that had been recognized, recorded, and set into motion in a way that could not be undone. The mist hung low over the street now, soft and persistent, turning the glow of headlights into blurred halos that stretched across the pavement, as if the night itself was unwilling to fully reveal what had just taken place, yet unable to hide it either. Officer Ryan Cole stood where he had been, but nothing about his presence felt the same. The posture that once carried certainty now replaced with something quieter, something heavier, like the weight of the moment had settled into him in a way that would not easily lift. Around him, the agents had begun to move with subtle purpose, not hurried, not dramatic, but deliberate, each step part of a sequence already understood, already decided. One of the SUVs shifted slightly, its engine deepening as if preparing to leave, while another agent stepped toward the rear vehicle, exchanging brief, quiet words that did not need to be overheard to be felt. Inside the first SUV, Naomi Carter remained composed, her gaze steady as she looked forward through the windshield, the faint reflection of streetlights crossing her face in slow patterns, her expression calm but focused, as if she was already beyond this moment, already moving toward what came next. Imagine standing at the edge of something that feels like an ending, only to realize it is actually the beginning of something far larger. The device in her hand dimmed slightly, its screen still active, still tracking, still connecting, while her mind aligned each detail with a clarity that did not require urgency, only precision. Outside, one of the agents approached Ryan once more, stopping just short of him, his presence steady, grounded. "You will be contacted within 48 hours, he said, his tone even, leaving no room for interpretation. Until then, maintain full compliance." The words were simple, procedural, but they carried the quiet finality of something that had already been set into motion. Ryan nodded slowly, the motion deliberate, his voice lower now, measured. Understood. There was no resistance in it, no attempt to reclaim what had already slipped away, only acknowledgement, the first step toward understanding something he could no longer ignore. The agent held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod before stepping back, his role in the exchange complete. The space between them felt different now, not tense, not confrontational, just defined by a truth that had been made visible. In the distance, the sound of the city continued, faint traffic, distant movement, life carrying on as it always did, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place on this small stretch of road. Inside the SUV, Naomi spoke again, her voice calm, steady, directed into the device with quiet authority. "Secure all related records," she said. "No delays." There was no need to explain, no need to justify. The instruction carried itself forward, moving through channels unseen but immediate. Outside, the vehicles began to reposition, engines humming softly, headlights adjusting, the formation shifting with the same controlled precision it had arrived with. The moment was closing, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that left no loose ends. Ryan glanced once more toward the SUV, his eyes lingering, not searching, not questioning, but recognizing, the kind of recognition that does not come from being told, but from finally seeing clearly. The rain continued to fall lightly, barely noticeable now, but still present, like the memory of something that would not fade quickly. And as the first SUV began to move, slowly pulling away from the curb, it became clear that what had unfolded here was no longer confined to this street, no longer contained within this night, but had already begun to extend outward, carrying its weight into places Ryan had never considered, into consequences that would not arrive all at once, but would come steadily, quietly, and without pause. The first SUV moved forward slowly, its tires cutting through the thin layer of water on the pavement, creating soft ripples that spread outward and disappeared just as quickly as they formed, like the moment itself, already passing yet leaving something behind. The second vehicle followed, maintaining the same measured distance, the same quiet coordination, until the street began to open again, the presence that had filled it now receding without noise, without spectacle, just a controlled departure that felt more final than any loud exit ever could. Officer Ryan Cole stood still as the vehicles pulled away, his eyes tracking them until the red glow of their taillights faded into the distance, leaving behind only the muted reflections of his own cruiser lights and the faint mist that continued to settle over everything. The street felt larger now, emptier, but not the same as it had been before, as if something invisible had shifted its shape in a way that could not be reversed. Imagine watching a moment end and realizing it is not the moment that matters, but what it has already set into motion. Behind him, one of the remaining officers shifted his stance, glancing between Ryan and the departing vehicles, his expression thoughtful, quieter than before. "You are going to write this up?" he asked, his voice low, careful. Ryan did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, at the faint traces of rainwater sliding off his sleeves, at the small details that suddenly felt more significant than they should have. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady but different, stripped of the certainty it once carried. "Everything." The word lingered, not as a routine response, but as a commitment he could feel the weight of. The other officer nodded slowly, not pressing further, understanding that there was nothing else to say in that moment that would change what had already happened. The cruiser lights continued to pulse, steady, rhythmic, but now they felt less like a signal and more like a reminder, repeating the same silent message over and over again. Ryan turned slightly, his gaze drifting across the street, taking in the details he had overlooked earlier, the quiet storefronts, the distant intersections, the absence of witnesses who would never know how close this moment had come to being something entirely different. The rain softened further, almost fading, leaving behind only a damp stillness that made every sound clearer, every movement more defined. In the distance, the additional patrol car began to reposition, its engine humming softly as it prepared to leave, its presence no longer necessary. The scene was closing, not with urgency, but with completion. Ryan reached up slowly, turning off the flashing lights on his cruiser. The sudden absence of red and blue changed everything, the street returning to its natural dim glow under the street lamps, the reflections settling, the colors fading. It was quieter now, realer. He stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle in, letting the reality of the night take its place without interruption. Then he moved, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with a deliberate pace as he walked back toward his vehicle, each step measured, each movement grounded in something that felt different from before. He paused at the door, his hand resting briefly on the handle, his reflection faintly visible in the window, distorted slightly by the moisture still clinging to the glass. For a second, he did not recognize the person looking back at him, not fully, not completely. Then he opened the door and stepped inside, the sound closing softly behind him, sealing him into a space where there would be no distractions, no interruptions, only the quiet presence of what had just happened. And as the engine started and the cruiser pulled slowly away from the curb, the street behind him returned to stillness. But the weight of the night did not stay there. It followed, carried forward into a future that had already begun to take shape. The cruiser moved through the quiet streets with a steady hum, its tires gliding over damp asphalt as the last traces of rain clung to the city like a fading memory. And inside, Officer Ryan Cole sat in silence, his hands resting on the wheel, his eyes fixed ahead but no longer seeing the road the same way. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow across his face, highlighting the stillness that had replaced the certainty he once carried so easily, the kind of certainty that had guided his decisions without question, without pause, until now. Imagine driving through a city you have known for years and realizing, for the first time, that you never truly saw it clearly. The streets looked the same, the signs, the buildings, the quiet intersections. But something beneath it all had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like a lens had been adjusted, and could not be returned to its previous state. Ryan exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel loosening slightly as the events of the night replayed in fragments. Not chaotic, not overwhelming, but precise. Each moment standing out with a clarity that made it impossible to ignore. The question, the assumption, the decision, the pause he had not taken. He reached a red light and stopped, the silence inside the vehicle deepening as the engine idled softly, the world outside continuing as if nothing had happened, unaware of the weight he now carried. A pedestrian crossed at the far end of the intersection, head down, moving quickly, and for a brief moment Ryan watched, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something unfamiliar, something closer to awareness. The light turned green, but he did not move right away, his foot hovering before finally pressing the pedal, the cruiser continuing forward at a slower pace than before. Across town, in a secured building far removed from the quiet street, Naomi Carter stepped out of the SUV, the air here different, controlled, the environment structured, every movement purposeful, every detail accounted for. The doors behind her closed softly as agents moved around her, their voices low, their actions coordinated, but none of it required her immediate attention. She walked forward with calm precision, her presence commanding not through force, but through clarity, the kind that did not need to be announced. Imagine carrying the weight of truth not as a burden, but as a responsibility, one that does not change with the moment, but defines it. Inside, screens flickered with information, data already being compiled, reports forming in real time, each detail from the night aligning with others, building something larger, something that would extend far beyond a single encounter. Naomi paused briefly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the progress without interruption, before speaking in a tone that remained steady, grounded. "Ensure accuracy," she said. "No assumptions." The words were simple, but they carried a deeper meaning, one shaped by everything that had just occurred. An agent nodded immediately, adjusting the data feed, refining the inputs, confirming each entry with careful precision. Back in the cruiser, Ryan turned onto a quieter road, the city thinning out around him, the hum of traffic fading into the distance as his thoughts settled into something heavier, something more permanent. He was not replaying the moment anymore. He was understanding it. Slowly, fully. The realization did not arrive with force, but with quiet clarity, the kind that cannot be ignored once it is seen. And as he drove forward into the dimly lit streets ahead, it became clear that this was not something he could leave behind at the corner where it happened, not something that would fade with time, but something that would remain, shaping what came next in ways he had never considered before. Morning did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slowly, light pushing its way through the edges of the city, soft and gradual, revealing streets that looked unchanged but carried something new beneath the surface, something unseen yet undeniable. Officer Ryan Cole sat inside the parked cruiser outside the station, the engine off now, the silence complete, his hands resting still on his lap as he stared ahead, not at anything in particular, but at everything all at once. The night was over, but it had not ended. It had followed him here, settled into the quiet space around him, waiting, not with pressure, but with presence. Imagine reaching a point where you can no longer look away, not because someone is forcing you to see, but because you finally understand that you need to. He stepped out of the vehicle slowly, the early morning air cool against his face, carrying none of the tension from the night before, just clarity, sharp and clean. Inside the building, the familiar sounds of routine had already begun, footsteps in the hallway, distant voices, the low hum of activity that usually blended into the background. But today each sound stood out, each detail more defined. Ryan walked in, his pace steady, his posture different, not heavier, but more grounded, like each step now carried intention rather than assumption. At his desk, a blank report waited on the screen, the cursor blinking steadily, patient, unchanged, ready for whatever he chose to put into it. He sat down, his fingers hovering above the keyboard for a moment, not hesitating, but aligning, choosing, understanding that what came next mattered in a way it never had before. Across the city, Naomi Carter stood near a wide window overlooking the skyline, the early light reflecting off glass and steel, the world below already in motion, unaware of the quiet decisions being made above it. Behind her, screens displayed finalized reports, verified data, patterns confirmed and documented, each piece aligned with precision, each conclusion grounded in truth rather than assumption. An agent approached quietly, stopping just short, his voice respectful. "All files have been secured," he said. Naomi nodded slightly, her gaze still directed outward, her voice calm, steady. "Then we move forward," she replied. There was no triumph in it, no sense of victory, only purpose, the continuation of something that did not begin with this moment and would not end with it either. Back at the station, Ryan began to type, each word deliberate, each sentence shaped with care, not to protect, not to justify, but to reflect exactly what had happened, nothing more, nothing less. The truth, plain and complete. Outside, the sun rose higher, light spreading across the streets, dissolving the last traces of night, but not the memory of it. And as the city carried on, unchanged on the surface yet altered in ways few would ever see, one truth remained, quiet but certain, echoing beyond the moment itself. Power is not proven in control. It is revealed in what you choose to see when control is gone.